Hi everyone and welcome back. It's Mindy, and in today's card I'm excited to share with you a stamp set that is part of the June 2019 release from My Favorite Things. This stamp set is called Friends with Fins. Now the Friends with Fins stamp set has a lot of super cute images on here, but right now I'm just going to be focusing on these two dolphins and the whale, and I'm going to be doing my Copic coloring first. I stamped my images out onto some Neenah Solaroid cardstock, and that is 80 pound. And I stamped them with the My Favorite Things black ink that is Copic friendly. And then I'm going to be using my Copic markers to color them. So I did list all of the colors at the top of the screen. For both dolphins, I'm coloring them almost the exact same way as far as shadows and highlights. And the colors that I'm using are BG49, BG15, BG13, and BG11. So I added my shadow areas to the back side of the dolphin and behind the fin, and then also a little bit on the belly and the back side of their flipper. And then I just blend it out with the remaining colors. And I do like to go over my images twice if I do have a lot of area to color, which in this case I do. So I did like to go over them twice. For me personally, that just helps my blending and also to kind of deepen up those shadow areas. So for the second dolphin, like I said, I'm coloring with the exact same colors. I added the shadow area to the bottom side of the dolphin, so like the belly. And I'm imagining that my light source is coming from my top right. So I would have the lightest part be at the tippy top of the head, a little bit on the, what is that, snout or a nose, on their nose, and then just blend it out. At the end of this video, I do have a card that I had created where I had stamped out and colored about every image on the stamp set. I really enjoyed these super cute images. I love creating ocean scenes because it really gives me an opportunity to do some ink blending. So be sure to stick around and check that out at the end. Now I'm moving on to the orca, and I used N8, N5, and N4. Now, if you have difficulty blending from an N8 to an N5, you can do some tip-to-tip Copic coloring. I went over them twice, or I went over the image twice, so I felt my blend was perfectly fine. I just had that N8 mainly towards the back of the killer whale, and then blending out, leaving a little bit of a highlight right in the front there. And then I do come in, I think it's with a W2 and a W0, and I just added little bits of those colors to the underside of the orca or the killer whale, and a little bit on the underside of the dolphins. So that just kind of helped so it wasn't so stark white. It just added that little bit of color to their undersides. So just popping in a little bit of shadow with that. It's really hard to see on camera, but in person I can tell. And then once I have those all finished up, I can take the coordinating dies and I'll just hold those in place with some purple tape, line those up, and then I can just run those through my die cutting machine. And I'll give you a quick look here at all of them all cut out. So these are the 3 images that I'll be using for my card. For my background, I'm going to be using a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock and the Make Waves stencil. I'm going to fill up this entire card panel. I only actually need just a portion of it, but I like to do a whole thing just in case I change my mind down the road. I would have this all ready. So I'm starting out with the Blueprint Sketch Distress Oxide ink and a blending brush, and I'm just lightly applying pressure. You can see I'm starting off actually on the stencil and working my way up, and I'm adding color all the way up to the top of this piece of cardstock. And then with the waves, what I can do is I'm just pushing a little bit harder right where the stencil is on the cardstock, and that'll give it a darker color there and it's lighter on top. So you can really get a lot of different shades of this color just by how hard you're pushing down on your blender brush. So now on to this second one, I'm just going to turn my stencil. That's going to give me a variety of waves. And same thing, I start out with a light pressure and I'm going up almost to the top of the next, up to the last one I just had stenciled. So it's almost entirely blue. And then just applying a little bit more pressure right where that wave stencil is. So I think this is a really great way to use the stencils, and especially with any type of distress inks or any kind of ink blending that you do, you can really get a lot of different shades by using just one color. So what I did here, because my paper was kind of moving, I took a piece of purple tape and I just tucked it underneath my cardstock so it attached to my glass media mat here. That way my cardstock stays in place while I'm moving my stencil and just working my way down the card. And one last row I'm going to squeeze in here. And also be careful of your fingerprints. My fingers are getting awfully close to the ink on that stencil, and I don't want that to transfer onto my cardstock. So to add a little bit of interest to this waves background, I took some Faded Jeans Distress Oxide ink, spritzed a little bit of water, and I'm just mixing that up with a paintbrush, and then I'm going to flick this just all over my background. I really like the contrast of those little speckles on my waves. And I'm also going to do this with some distress paint. I did use the white distress paint. And same thing, I actually just put a little bit down on my glass mat with some water, mix those together, and then I'm going to put this onto an acrylic block. And then I'll flick those onto my background. And I really like that dark blue and the white. And like I said, you could use this entire panel. I'm just going to be using a strip of it, but it's always good to kind of be more prepared than underprepared. Once I have that done, I'm going to just set it off on the side to dry, and I'm going to work on my sentiment. So this sentiment also comes from the Friends with Fins stamp set. I'm using a black piece of cardstock that I just prepped with an anti-static powder tool. I'm using my mini Misty for this since the sentiment just fit great on there. So I'll ink up that stamp set with an embossing ink and just put some light pressure down. And by just tapping it lightly, I can go back through and tap it again to really make sure all of that ink is there versus squishing your stamp onto the cardstock. I've really been trying to be careful about that lately. And then I'm using some alabaster embossing powder and just sprinkling that onto the cardstock. And then I can heat that up with my heat tool. Once that's melted and cooled off, I just take a Swiffer cloth and kind of dust off any of the excess powder I had on there. And I'll use the Slanted Sentiments Die-Namics and just lining it up. It just barely fits into this. So I'll hold that down with the purple tape, run that through my die cut machine so my sentiment is ready. And now for the actual card front. So I want 2 pieces of cardstock cut here. The first one, I want it to measure a 1/2 inch. And then my other piece I need to measure 2 inches. And this is out of a piece of white cardstock that was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And this is going to help create that window. It was just enough room in there where I could place my critters in between to see the waves. I thought it was just a different design, kind of interesting. You could also turn this into a shaker card if you wanted. That would look really great with that waves stencil background and the critters. Now, as I was laying out my pieces to get an idea where I wanted them to be, I'm noticing that my ink blended panel is not dry. Those flicks were still wet. So I'm just going to bring in my heat tool and just try and dry those off. What I want to do is I want to pop up my panels. So I'm going to be adding foam tape to my 2 strips over here. I like to use a big foam tape roll because then I can trim down my foam tape to fit whatever pieces I need to. I went ahead and got those all covered with the foam tape, and before I attach anything, I want to get my critters lined up in that window. So before I remove that backing of the foam tape, I'm just kind of laying it on top. That way I can go ahead, I'm just going to add some tape runner to the back of these critters, and I'm going to tuck them underneath there because I want it to look like they're kind of jumping in from the sides. So my whale is going to have its tail off on the right-hand side, kind of hidden, and then the dolphins are coming in from the left-hand side. Then I can go ahead and remove the backing and put my front panels down. And somewhere along the line, I got some ink on that 2-inch strip that I had cut. And I know I have a sand eraser. I was going to try and buff those off, but the sand eraser just, it wasn't taking that paint off. So you can see I'm trying to get that. It's not really working. So the easiest fix here was just to cut another piece of cardstock. And so that's what I did. And I just took a tape runner and I'm adding it right on top. You can't even really notice. So just adding that right on top and that'll fix my oopsies. And good as new. Then I'll work on my sentiments. So I already have that die cut. I just added some foam tape to the right hand side of it because I want that to line up flush with my cardstock that already has the foam tape. And then the other end, I just added a tape runner to it to stick it right to the card front. And that is going to finish up this card. So I really hope you enjoyed taking a look at my process with this. I think this is a great card design and would make, like I said, a really great shaker card too. And if you did enjoy the video, I would really appreciate a big thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so and would like to see more of my videos. And be sure and click the little bell so that you're notified when my new videos do come up. I will have all of these supplies listed on my blog and in the video description as well. And here's a look at that second card I made where I had used the Friends with Fins. I also used the Undersea Die-Namics to add the ocean sea bottom and some coral and some rocks. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful week.